All right, I'm going to get going. Good morning, everyone. We've just hit 40 people online, and we've also got the session recorded this morning. So a very warm welcome to everyone joining us online today. And I say warm welcome because it is a cold winter's morning in Johannesburg. I am Joanne Pole, a senior advisor at Kearney, based in our Johannesburg office. It is our absolute privilege to host this Connected Workplace session in conjunction with Business Engage and to have you all on board with us. So this weekend, we celebrated Youth Day in South Africa, as well as Father's Day. Youth Day serves as a reminder of bravery, resilience, and the determination of our young South Africans. It also acknowledges the courage to stand up against injustice and to fight for human rights. So too, Father's Day considers all father figures, those who actually play both roles, those who are providers, protectors, pillars of strength in our homes, our workplace, and communities. But importantly, these holidays are opportunities to reflect on the progress we have made in empowering and in uplifting people. Plus, we still have a road to travel, and it's a good reminder of the work still to be done. So we all have a role to play in influencing where we stay, where we play, where we work, and where we pray positively, as well as influencing the leaders of tomorrow as active participants in shaping the present. They also remind us of the importance of sharing lessons learned, celebrating success, advocating for change, and inspiring new and effective ways of doing things. The world is different, but we do know that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a side story to our corporate strategies. It's a business imperative, something we have to embrace fully to ensure the sustainability of our corporate culture. We'll talk a bit more about that later, as well as our business as a whole. Increasingly and importantly, these are topics that become part of our everyday life and our DNA. And so creating an enabling future requires collective effort. It requires an investment in an ever-increasing interconnected world, fostering a connected workplace and an environment that promotes a sense of belonging. Not only is it the right thing to do, but it's actually essential for organizational growth, for health, for success, and for innovation. And this essential rightness is the moral compass that helps us navigate through the complexities of everyday life and business, the challenges that, as well as challenges. It guides us to creating what's next and doing that sustainably. Kearney was founded on this principle of essential rightness, and this, together with our core values, is integral to who we are as a firm, and actually why we are here today too. It underpins how we interact with each other. It's intrinsic to who we are, our client relationships, how we treat one another in terms of our people, and how we support the communities we operate in meaningfully. It underpins putting people at our core, always seeking to do right by our clients in the work that we do in their best interest, and in promoting fairness, compassion, and respect for how we solve today's challenges and also unlock tomorrow's opportunities. It reminds us of the intrinsic worth in each and every human being, as well as the dignity and respect they should be shown. So the connected workplace for us serves as a platform to come together, to expand our networks, foster those connections, build relationships, exchange knowledge and experiences, learn, create synergies, and collaborate to unlock these new possibilities. Together, work on bigger programs and much more impact on the ground. So today, we will weave together our Kearney story, the internal journey we've made, and the commitment we have as we work towards our diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities. We'll describe some formal governance components, the structures, and our enabling foundations, as well as the networks we have in place that have shaped connection, collective ownership, and participation across our identity groups. We'll go from the oldest, the Women's Network, and tell you a bit more about Project Vital, to our youngest, Enable, which is about persons living with invisible and visible disabilities. And so with that, a very warm welcome again to all of you. A heartfelt thank you to Business Engage for the platform today, and to our panelists, Abby Goodlab, the Middle East Africa Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Manager, Nolan, the Africa HR Director, and Francois, Middle East Africa Affinity Lead for the Enable Network. Thank you for joining us to share your learnings, your perspective, and your considerations. And so, without further ado, to each of you, if you could introduce us just to who you are. It's a little bit more than what the blurb says or what LinkedIn tells us. And in terms of the lens you view the world with, what it is you bring to this panel today. I'll start with you, Abby, then go to Nolan, and then to you, Francois. Abby, over to you.
Thanks so much, Joe. Good morning, everyone, and apologies for the weird sound, but hopefully you can understand me as I talk. So I'm Abby Gottlieb. I'm based in Johannesburg, born and bred and very proud South African. I've had a really interesting journey with Kearney that spans quite a few industries, service practices, countries, all the things. So I started with Kearney back in 2015 after doing an industrial psychology and change management specialization degree. I was working as a consultant for a number of years, eventually affiliating with our practice, the leadership change and organization practice, which really focuses on all things people and organizations and looking at those intersectionalities. And I was dealing more and more with people, also not just with clients, but also internally through our people care and development committee. And that love and passion that I have for all things people, it really it got me thinking, I could do this internally as a full-time job, not just with clients. And so that really motivated the shift that I made to what we call our management services team and now leading our diversity, equity, and inclusion portfolio for Middle East and Africa. So that's the lens which I come with today. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Abby, and please, I hope you do feel 100% soon. Keep warm, and if you need to put your camera off, all good, as you need to blow your nose. But
Thank
thank
you.
you. Nolan, over to you.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Joe. And it's great to be here. So thank you for having me. So I am Nolan. I've been with Kearney now for 4 years in management consulting for around 12 years, which is quite a long time when I thought about it last night. But I must say that being at Kearney has been a unique journey for me because of the people-centered focus. And it's something that I'm really passionate about. So people, anything people related, anything culture related, DE&I specific is really where my sweet spot is. So I'm here, I guess, to share a bit about our DE&I journey specifically, and I'll tell you a bit about what it means to me. For me, DE&I means that we have an inclusive culture where everyone can bring their best and authentic selves to work every day while thriving in an environment that nurtures a person holistically and ensures growth in all dimensions of their lives. I think we have such a varied group of people, which I'm particularly proud of in our office, a very connected group of people. And it's taken work to get there. And I think a lot of conscious effort and a conscious initiatives that have really created this space. So very happy to share that experience with everyone today.
Thank you, Nolan. And I think, like Abby, you are absolutely where you are by deliberate choice, which is also quite a gift to the organization. Francois, over to you.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I think, firstly, thank you to Business Engage for allowing the platform for us to share the Enable journey, the DEI journey at Kearney, and just share our perspectives as well and share our story. I think biggest impact is people first and making sure that we connect as people with other people. So who am I? I'm Francois Klomp. I'm a strategy consulting at Kearney. Been with the firm for 3 years, focusing across strategy, mergers and acquisition, and strategic operations across private equity and financial services. Apart from that, and more importantly, I'm the lead for the Enable Middle East and Africa chapter, as well as part of the core team, which mobilized, as Joe mentioned, the youngest affinity network within Kearney, Enable Kearney, which promotes disability awareness and inclusion across the workplace. I'm also a strong believer in D&I with a specialization in disability awareness and inclusion. I'm devoted to challenging and changing that narrative surrounding disability inclusion in the corporates, seeing the value people with disabilities add in traditionally thought of as cutthroat environments. Reflecting on what DI means for me, it means a corporate world that's universally accessible and free from prejudice, where people can bring their whole selves to work, fit in, and thus give 100% focus to the task at hand and bringing value to clients, communities, and people within the organization. I'm also personally driven for disability awareness and inclusion. I have a niece living with a mental and physical disability, and despite being 6, what she has endured, the resilience she shows, and the joy she brings everyone around her reminds me of why I think she is the stronger person I know. D&I done correctly works towards a systemic change within corporate environments to be universally accessible. And for me, it means that there's place for people like Ila Faye in the corporate environment.
Thank you. nothing like leading by example. And I think we often get taught more by those that have endured hardship than we do by helping them. So I think the collective effort is important. Thank you, Francois. So let's get going then. I think you all have volumes of experience, information, I think lessons to be learned that can be shared. And Abby, if I start with you, your passion for all things people, to coin the phrase you've used repeatedly, and I love that. And the fact that you actually have a mission about exploring the dynamics between people, their work context, and how to best shape and improve them and allow them to be themselves. That shift in your career is not only meaningful for the organization, but for you. And so maybe if you could outline a little bit about Kearney's diversity, equity, and inclusion journey, thinking back to its origins, the transformation over time. It hasn't always been smooth sailing. Sometimes our intention and actions don't necessarily play out the way we planned. And then ultimately the strategic direction that's been embraced. So tell us a bit more.
Sure, that's a lot of things that we need to speak to. So I'll try keep it short, sweet, to the point, but also keep me honest and on time. So, I mean, even thinking back to when I first joined Kearney, it was all about essential rightness. And it's really, doing what is right, even when others don't believe or think or know that it is so. And that really started the journey. And we've been talking about DE&I at Kearney for a really long time. We formalized our strategy nearly 15 years ago, and obviously strategy evolves, and I'll speak more to that later, but really thinking about what does it mean and how do we work towards that? So doing some kind of a benchmark assessment, putting in place some aspirations. That really all started back in around 2010. And we started thinking about enablers, so policy changes, ways of working, measurement tools, the mechanisms that you need to actually understand where you are versus where you're going and what the gap is between those two things. So we've done a lot, and we know that there's a lot more to do. And that really came after every strategy and baseline reflection to see just how big that gap continued to be and learning what we were doing wrong. And I think if, that 2010 period, we had a strategy, we had a set of ambitions, but they weren't formalized. It was very centralized, top down. It was sitting at the global level. Some policy work had changed. They were piloting things in different places. There wasn't enough follow through, and there wasn't enough dedicated capacity, dedicated budget, all the things that you really need to shift the needle here. And so what really started to make a difference was the massive overhaul in overarching brand and strategy and positioning that happened in 2019. And that's when, Alex, our new chairman and the so-called head of Kearney, he came in and this overall happened where we refreshed our values. So thinking around generosity, passion, solidarity, all those critical values, but still underpinned by the things like essential rightness that are so core to who we are. And the so-called dial-up strategy was formed. So that's really speaking to the diversity, the inclusion, the apprenticeship, and the leadership that you need to make a solid and sustainable difference in how we do things, who we do things with, the approach that we take. And so that dial up, so to speak, strategy is where we started to solidify D&I a little bit more in terms of the formalization. But what again shifted things was COVID. So in 2020, when all the chaos started, more things had to change because the world was fundamentally changing. We couldn't do what was just the status quo. And so, yes, there was the dial-up strategy, but that was further enhanced with our commitments to change that we made. And we did it with our global strategy in mind. So we had our 3 pillars, our clients, our people, our communities, and we made these bold commitments that we wanted to work towards during the COVID period. And that was everything around the NGOs we were working with, the donations we were making and matching, the social impact days, so the actual volunteering time that we gave, the policy work that we wanted to move the needle on. So there was a lot of shifting happening in 2020. But again, when we stood back, 2021, 2022, the numbers still weren't changing. And that's ultimately our measure stick of what is and is not working. So the fact that our diversity representation numbers hadn't really significantly changed at both junior and senior ranks, the intake percentages versus the, retention and the delta of retention between dominant and non-dominant groups, we could really take those baseline numbers and see, what work did we start with? Where are we now? How big is the delta still? And really taking time to acknowledge what are those critical success factors which we had put in place. So some work around policy, for example, the work around the networks, which Nolan and Francois will speak to in terms of ground up, bottom up, systemic change agent movement. But those numbers are telling, right? So the fact that we still didn't have dedicated capacity, dedicated budget, decentralized execution work on the ground in a coordinated fashion, there were a lot of learnings there on what to do differently. And that's really, I guess, the kickoff for what happened with the formalization of Project Vital. But I'll pause there and just let me know if there's anything you want to probe further before I get into the Project Vital side of things.
I think what's quite telling is the fact that although it's a 2010 journey, for example, in terms of real intent that was documented and started, is the refresh that happened throughout the period is that it's constantly evolving. In terms of what you said is quite key. And the ability to recognize how far you have come or what you still need to do. And what's interesting there is the level of awareness required to stop and pause. And when you find yourself in a room or you find yourself in a space or work environment, realize actually we're not there yet. Outside of just the numbers, it's actually that real feeling when you're together. And I often see that in our functions. So if you think about the all hands or where we bring a group of people together, we actively look around to see if we live out what DEI should mean in terms of what it looks like in everyday spaces. So maybe with that in mind, because I remember Stephen Parker actually commenting on that, given Project Vital and the number of women in the room as an example. Maybe a more detail on that. You started to allude to that in the end of your state, but really it's about the crucial factors in that space for success, maybe what it meant to conceptualize that properly and actually execute on what integrating that meant with the DE&I strategy, and from a vital perspective, how that tied into essential rightness.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it acknowledges, what Nolan was also talking to in his introduction piece, and what we often speak to is people are constantly changing. The individuals in the room are constantly changing. And how do you steer the ship? Because the individuals make up the collective. And so it's never going to end, this journey. It's an evolving journey that if you don't keep tabs on and you don't work on, you're going to missteer the ship, so to speak. So I don't think this work will ever end, and I think it's going to continue to be refreshed and revitalized based on who is in the room and who needs to be in the room. So Project Vital really was that step back to say, what have we not done in the best way possible? What more do we need to do, and how are we going to do it? What are we even working towards? And that massive refresh of strategy then happened. And so Project Vital really it started to look at who needs to be in the room, so that the D of D&I, diversity. So what are the representation aspirations that we have? And yes, it's about the woman conversation, but it's an everybody conversation. So it's people with visible and invisible disabilities. It's people in the LGBTQIA plus communities. It's people who are of a racial ethnicity that's not white. It's the fathers in the room who need the parental policies in order to support the other caregivers in their family. So it's an everybody conversation. And so Project Vital, the priority is on gender because the delta there is so big, but it also acknowledges that it's not just women. So it speaks to historically underrepresented groups in all their forms and fashions. So it really breaks down what it means for women in historically underrepresented groups in terms of the people journey. So it starts with the choose bucket, which speaks to how do we attract, recruit, convert talent in the pipeline and get our representation of different groups to be more equal. It also speaks to how we keep our talent, so help them to stay and thrive. And that's really retention. It's the learning, it's the ways of working, it's the policy work to help reward and compensate and support our people. So it's a massive bucket of initiatives there. It's also advancement. So it's how do you look at talent in terms of their junior versus senior representation and supporting those to grow with you and to lead for you as they grow in the organization. And then finally, there's this piece around advocacy, and that's in two ways. It's the advocacy of people recommend us because they really enjoy working with us and they value the work that we do. But it's also the advocacy of these topics, the people topics that are so important for any organization, particularly Kearney as a people business. How do they talk about D&I? How do they support people in the room to thrive? And that advocacy piece, it's reflected in engagement surveys, for example. It's reflected in the awards and the recognition that we get in the external market. So Project Vital really allowed us to look at these 4 critical pillars, which encapsulate the people's journey through the organization from the time they join to the time they, become alumni or lead for us. So it really took that step back from that perspective, but more importantly, it looked at the governance and the enablers as critical success factors. So acknowledging where we didn't get it right and what more we need to be doing and the ways in which we have to do it to make it stick this time and to get us to the ambitions that will close the deltas. So it looked at the policy work that needs to be done, but also the governance structures. So you've got different levels of engagement, decision making, risk mitigation going on from the global level and cascaded down to each region and country level, so that it's got a level of centralization, formalization, consistency to be aligned to global strategy. But as it cascades, it acknowledges each local nuance and what needs to happen on the ground. So that governance structure and how it cascaded was done with a lot of intentionality this time to balance the level of centralization and decentralization. It also looked at how we work with finance, so having the proper budget investment pools and code structures to not just allow us to work towards initiatives, but also to report on them and to see the work that we're doing and the impact that we're making in terms of finance, both expenses and time for proxies for impact and return on investment to see how we're moving the needle. It also looked at the team structures. So the fact that you have, say, a head of diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't good enough, because who's doing the work on the ground beyond the strategy, design, development? So really putting in place team structures to help on the ground execution and navigation towards these important topics. So someone's ultimately responsible and accountable and working in a dynamic way at each country level. So thinking through team capacity. And then it looks at also the integration of global strategy through to local execution. So, for example, working with the networks, and I won't go into too much detail here because I know Nolan and France will speak more to this, but how do you consider DE&I as an umbrella for all these networks? So the fact that we've got the Women's Network Enable, which Francois will speak to, we've got Black at Kearney, we've got VetNet, which looks at the veterans group, particularly in Middle East and some of the other countries, not necessarily South Africa specifically. Who am I missing? We've got the Proud Network. So all of these fall under a D&I umbrella, which look at identity and community. And it's how do we have far more integration, collaboration, and systemic work across all of them that acknowledges intersectionality of identity and supports change in a more critical way on the ground. So those are some of the things that we really thought through when it came to Project Vital, to make sure that this time the way we were doing it was different, and it wasn't just following a tick the box exercise. Oh, we'll run unconscious bias training, because that's not good enough. It doesn't actually move the needle.
And I love the fact that actually recognizing where you are, who needs to be in the room, and then trying to fill that delta and constantly revisiting the lens you see the room with, I think is quite key. The intersectionality you talked about, and we'll come down and do a bit more around the affinity networks, I think is quite key. One thing doesn't describe you, right? If we had to write on a piece of paper 10 words that described us and cross one off at a time because we connect with someone, we'll discover that there's not one word that says we are either a woman, we are either, Black at Kearney, proud, etc. It's actually a collective component that really makes up who we are, and it's multifaceted. And you talked about that in terms of the approach, which is it's an everybody conversation, and off the back of that intentionality. And maybe the takeaway out of that, and then Nolan, I've got a question for you, is an ROI cubed. So it's return on intention, investment, and integrity in each of those pieces. But we'll come back to those things. So thank you, I think, Abby, for setting a really great scene. Nolan, you have a demonstrated history, I think, of creating an environment that attracts, that nurtures, and retains the talent that Abby was talking to. Not only do you advocate for the organization and people want to join you, but when you're there, what does it actually feel like in terms of the values, the vision, etc.? And your passion for people, I've firsthand seen absolutely evidenced in practical insights in terms of what you say, share, proven methodologies, and Abby alluded to some of the tools in place, and then inspiring stories actually of what has happened or gone before. And those stories generally help shape a future narrative too. So maybe a little bit more from your side around the journey to the current state. I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. If you think about, to some degree, the umbrella that Abby talked about, the global, regional, and local pieces, And then specific examples. I think this is really to your point around where your sweet spot sits on culture and people, around the people first efforts. So over to you.
Great, thanks, Joe. And I think something that Abby mentioned a lot was it's a very people-centered business. So everything we do revolves around people. It's about caring for people, nurturing people, and growing and developing people, creating an inclusive environment. So, Abby mentioned 2020 was probably a turning point for us where we really needed to go back and rethink everything that we were doing. And something that we did at that time was we ran what we called a people care jam globally. And what we encouraged was to hear from our people, what is it that we need to be focusing on? What are the important things? What are the important initiatives and topics that we need to bring to the front? And we had a lot of feedback coming from that initiative, which was really great. So great ideas, great comments, great questions around what we could do better. And what we did at the time was, we looked at all of this feedback through that DE&I lens, which takes it one level deeper and really creates that bigger impact that we want to see. So from this People Care Jam and from all of this feedback we had received, we looked at what do we need to focus on from a global perspective? And there were quite a number of initiatives that came up. We looked at things like work-life balance, people experience, and people experience is really deep. It's more than just learning and development on the job, but how do we bring a whole person to the workplace, including the private lives that they have, because you made up of your professional life and your personal life. So that DE&I lens was so important for us. We looked at learning and development from a global perspective. And I think going back to Abby and Project Vital, it's also about taking it that level deeper. How do we target each and every group, each and every individual in a way that is really impactful for the person and the business? We looked at learning and development again and really skills transfer. We tried to ease the process of transfers to allow people the opportunity to grow and to gain skills in different environments. From a regional perspective, all of these cascaded down, and we had to look at a region, at us as a region, the Middle East and Africa. And there we looked at how could we really improve on each of these topics. And we introduced, again, when we say people first, we looked at how we can improve the experience of people. What we've done there is we introduced work smart charters, as we call it, or ways of working to make sure that the individual needs of people are met while they're working on projects, to make sure that we're addressing the learning and development, the apprenticeship mechanisms that are really important to us and vital to our culture. We also introduced things like team barometers, and this helped us to almost pulse check how is the experience at any given time. And this also allows us to dive in again, also using this DE&I lens, where do we need to add support and make sure that there is ample support and community around, supporting each other. We strengthened our learning and development program. So regionally, we looked at reintroducing, I think COVID hits quite hard because we had to reduce travel. So that excitement of traveling for learning had disappeared to some extent. We had to bring that back, which was really great for us and a big win. On the ground, from a local perspective, again, another cascade down into our local perspectives. We needed to look at what was important for our office. And I think here again, going back to that DE&I lens, going back to our people focus, it's difficult to run programs that are not going to impact the people that are involved and important. So again, I think we took it a second level deeper. We try to understand from a local perspective, what is it that is needed in our office for our people? And we're a diverse bunch of people. So we very diverse in ethnicity, in gender, in just the people that we are, even the backgrounds that we come from. And we've done some amazing things on the ground. We've introduced some really detailed and targeted learning programs for specific groups and for specific people. We've looked at our policies around leave, for example, study leave. We understand that people want to grow and want to develop. We've looked at how we can support that through whether financially or through time, and there we looked at our study leave policies. Something that we've done and taken the lead on in South Africa that I'm particularly proud of is being bold around our DE&I agenda, specifically to something like parental leave. We have introduced a really robust parental leave policy that is also inclusive of everyone in the office. So we're looking at things like adoption, birth, surrogacy, same-sex parenting, making sure that the leave that we offer is equitable for everyone that is in the organization. We've also looked at people and culture. I mean, we've introduced a lot of connectivity to allow people to connect and to get to know each other and to really understand who we are working with. And I think it's taken the culture to a next level because people genuinely care for each other. We think of ourselves as a family more than just a company or colleagues. We've introduced a number of DE&I initiatives and events that we've had that's really allowed people to connect. This has also pulled together a lot of allyship. So we've seen a lot of people coming to the front to stand up and pioneer for these different groups that we have within the office. Another big win for us was looking at health and well-being overall, because again, I think we have very different people with very different needs. And health, well-being, mental health and well-being, these are really important topics that we constantly raising, constantly engaging on. What has helped, and Abby's mentioned it in her discussion as well, is we've introduced affinity networks. And these affinity networks, a lot have been around for a long period of time. Some of them have started very, very recently, and Francois will talk about the one that we're very proud of as a South African initiative, which is Enable. But the affinity networks have really helped to deepen our culture to another level. And we've got various networks like Black at Kearney, we've got Women's Network, we've got Proud, which is our LGBTQI+ network. And what we've seen is that these have really encouraged discussions. It's encouraged openness. It's encouraged a sense of belonging that's really important to us as an office. So just to mention a few of the things that we've done, but happy to expand if you have more questions.
I think definitely going to ask you a little bit more on some of the networks, but I think the opportunity that a people care jam allows you in terms of actionable insights, policy recommendations, program development or initiatives, and you're part of co-creating that solution, I think speaks volumes in terms of some of the tools that have subsequently played out. I see some of the chats in the comments have been around, or in the comments in the chat box have been really around the barometers. So we talked about ways of working that is agreed in terms of the entire team, but also those barometers, which is initially from an Anne Franklin perspective and some of the experience started off as anonymous. They still are, but people voluntarily share their feedback around this is how I felt and why. And it's a very holistic view when you talk about health and well-being, because those barometers look at you at work and then how are you actually overall. And I think that opportunity to have those conversations in a safe space and that psychological safety that's continuously enabled, I think is quite key in terms of creating an environment where culture is not a top-down proposition. We've often said it's bottom-up, inside out, top-down. It's what happens in the car park, at the coffee machine, in the water cooler, in the offline chat on Teams, for example. That's quite key. There is a question here which I'll come back to when we do the Q&A. But maybe just before we get to that, and I did see it, Kado, so we'll come back to you, is just a bit more on the affinity networks. The reason being is by nature we gravitate towards a tribe, right? I see you, we look similar, we do similar things, we have the same background, come from the same place or same beliefs, etc. And so it's an easy space for me to find an affinity. But community is about the fact that actually I step out of my comfort zone to some degree, find a broader community, which is where the magic happens often in spaces where we look at the collective making an impact. And maybe the question there on these affinity networks is, how do we manage the intersectionality across them versus being just part of an affinity network And earlier, if we looked at the Kearney story, we talked about the fact that these were enablers for the diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. So maybe just your thoughts on intersectionality there.
So I think something that's firstly really important, and you mentioned it now, Joe, Abby's mentioned it, it's creating a safe space. And I think that safe space is critical to building a strong culture and building a community, if I can put it in those words. And what we've seen through the affinity networks is that it's really created a deeper level of connectivity with our people. And again, I'm coming back to the point of allyship, because a lot of people are voluntarily and willingly getting involved in many different initiatives in the office. So we do have the affinity networks, which creates quite a nice space for people that have a shared experience and understanding. But at the same time, it's really opened up a lot of discussion in the office around awareness. We've done trainings in the office that have really encouraged discussion amongst our people. We've had, to give you some examples, we've had fireside chats with executives who live with a disability. And these have really opened up the office to a lot of engagement and discussion around topics that are really important. And I think while the affinity networks are there and create a great space for people like the LGBTQI plus community or the Black community or the women community, what we are seeing in the office is that all of these networks are now coming together with the allies and building a culture and of inclusivity for everyone in the office. And that's really the highlight for me and something that I've enjoyed seeing quite a bit. Again, it's also led to all of these networks coming together to work on our newest affinity network, Enable, which Francois will talk about, and seeing everyone working together to build a community, which we now see as one community and not in these individual silos. And that's something that's been really great for me. It's really improved our culture. It's improved our value proposition. It's made people excited, giving them purpose and a sense of belonging to our organization. So the intersectionality, again, is something that's so crucial, especially when we see it coming together and we see the bigger impact.
And I think it talks to that piece that everyone's an alien somewhere, and you created a safe space initially, then the ripple around that being bigger in terms of intersectionality, and then creating communities. So the shift continues to enhance how you interact and engage. Really love that. And the passion for people is very tangible. I think, Abby, in what you've shared and noted in what you've shared, and the fact that you keep alluding to the word experience. And experience talks to how you feel and how you make someone else feel, as opposed to just intention. That is where outcome is actually realized. So with that, maybe I think we need to get onto Enable. We've heard about it a few times in terms of being our youngest affinity network. It was recently launched, and when I say recently, early last year, but Francois, you'll tell us more. And you've played a really lead role in this, I think, in your devotion to challenging the status quo, so how we think about it and see it and experience it, and the narrative around disability awareness, etiquette specifically as well, and a space where everyone is, I suppose, not recognized and just allowed to work well, but actually people of all abilities have the opportunity to be their best. And this is sort of grounded not only in our essential rightness, but to your point, Nolan, around awareness, Abby, around training, etc., is our values and specifically curiosity and the combination of curiosity and empathy. So where we want to actually understand each other. So maybe a bit more from yourself, Francois, please, as the lead for Enable across Middle East and Africa and part of the global core team for this. The inspiration behind the journey of creating Enable Kearney, how it aligns to the broader objectives you've heard about earlier. And I think maybe a little bit more from your side in terms of why Enable enables all.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thanks for prompting that. So I think just to build on Nolan and Abby's fantastic points up until now, Enable's journey is long-term and it was people-driven. And I think that's why it's super impactful. So if we kind of think about the chronological order, it started all the way back in 2018 with a global D&I team, which kind of speaks to the top-down global viewpoint about then what's next for DEI at Kearney. And then in 2019, 2020, it was also bottom up. So from the South African office, which I'm super proud of, from Nolan, as well as a couple of employees living with disabilities within the South African office, putting their hand up, actually organizing an office event, as well as an awareness speaker in 2021 and 2020, as well as the learnership program we have for employees at Kearney, kind of sparking the idea. Thereafter, in mid-2022, the global team formalized the opportunity, nominating a South African team, essentially led by the core team, which is me, Nolan, Joe, as well as a few global representatives, which I'm super proud of. And since then, it's been a massive momentum game. So I'd say last year, 2022, we really formalized, received global support as well as executive sponsorship. And since then, we've had a global launch, a regional launch. We've done various trainings. We've mobilized teams across our 4 regions, so across the Americas, APAC region, as well as Europe, and starting out of Middle East Africa. And we've identified 3 phases. So firstly, the build phase, understanding, just creating awareness for people with disabilities living with visible and invisible disabilities. Currently our grow phase, so trying to build the network and focusing on creating awareness within Kearney, and then finally sustain. So make sure, as Abby mentioned, each of the different regions will have a sustainable delegation of authority and structure, which we took from Project Vital as a learning, to make sure that each year it's their own journey and their own affinity network that they own, instead of trying to run it top down. I think on a personal note, I'm extremely passionate about it. I fully believe people with disabilities bring a massive gain and massive positive value to the table. They unlock empathy and they unapologetically themselves. Those are the 2 key ones for me. I also think it links to our values. So core being essential rightness, but it links to solidarity. So being there for others. It links to passion, the momentum we've gained in the past year, driving bottom up with the people, the curiosity to break the status quo, as you mentioned, the boldness to step forward, put our hands up and say, we want to be part of the 4% prioritizing disability awareness and inclusion. And then finally, the generosity to give back to our people, our clients, and our communities. In the end, it's underpinned by our culture. So making sure that Project Vital and the broader structure enables bottom-up impact. I think in the end, the biggest impact comes on a person-to-person level. So as you mentioned, it's the chats around the water cooler. It's understanding the situation of another employee living with a disability, but that is enabled by the top-down initiatives being run. So the governance structures we have, the Project Vital we're running, the amazing D&I efforts that Nolan's running in the local office, that enables the bottom-up organic impact.
And I think I love the fact that a lot of this was born, it's not a short-term journey, right? It's a long-term strategy that gained momentum as more people leaned in, so to speak, and we had more opportunity to leverage it. And from the affinity network specifically around what Enable does, you mentioned the 4% of companies that prioritize this out of the 90 that prioritize DE&I. So it really is a small percentage, which is overwhelming if you consider that 15% of the world's population is living with a disability. And those stats are quite telling. So one of the key things, when Abby alluded earlier to metrics that we measure, how many people self-ID, and if they self-identify, we're able to help better, be more meaningful and more deliberate in our intentions and how they play out. And so as a consequence, creating that safe environment, we've talked about it earlier, but not just a safe environment, but where actually vulnerability is recognized as a strength, the opportunity for you to share your story so that people and ourselves can learn and do better, be better, and do more. I think it's something we try really hard to foster, and that's where the generosity component speaks to who we are and solidarity in terms of our values. So maybe, Francois, given the Affinity Network really kicked off in 2018 around thinking, but gained proper momentum in December, October, maybe October, November, December last year, is reflecting on that and the fact that this has been a nearly 15-year journey, as Abby said, maybe some of the lessons you learned, or if you could share some insights that would shape anyone's approach if they started from scratch today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. And before I jump into that, just to kind of frame the context behind why Enable is so important. So as you mentioned, 15% of the world, that's 1 in 6 people. I think people living with disabilities is an underrepresented group within marginalized communities. And I'm super proud that Kearney has identified that and that we can champion awareness for them. So moving on to the actual question, I always get derailed. I think I'd like to kind of answer first what we did right, because Abby, this is something that I learned from Abby, is just taking a step back, acknowledging how far we've come, how far the journey's been, and the impact that we've had. So first what we did right, and then we can go to the classic even better if. So what we could have focused on more, what is super important if you are thinking of starting a disability awareness affinity network or group within your company. And I think, in essence, what is an affinity network? It's creating a platform for people to be comfortable to raise their concerns and be their best selves, where otherwise they wouldn't have. It's the barometers, creating the opportunity for people to raise their concerns in a project where they otherwise would have been hesitant to do so. So I think what we did right is, firstly, as mentioned, it's people first. We started with a passionate team. So we identified people that really are actually passionate about DEI, both on a professional and a personal drive. So we had a global team, as well as Joe and Nolan being on the team, Abby being on initially, a couple of fantastic consultants. I think some of them are on the call as well, listening in, and that really allowed the impact. Secondly, we had executive support. If you want to go far, make sure that you have executive buy-in, because that ensures sustainability over the long term. As an example, I think if you have the core team, a lot of the, let's say, members, life happens, right? You move on with your career, etc. But the executives tend to stay longer within an organization. So making sure that they have, let's say, the groundwork to nominate a team each year or every set cycle, and make sure that they identify the passionate people. Thirdly, finding the right partner is super important. So we've partnered with Springboard Consulting and Disability In as our corporate partners globally, as well as locally with Transcend. So it's knowing that you don't know everything. I think that's super important, and identifying the right partner for you, understands what your organization stands for and understands your values. I think we all have our day jobs, and apart from this, I'm also a consultant. So it's acknowledging that I'm not going to be everything everywhere all at once, and it's actually okay to partner and consult experts. I also think using offline channels is super impactful. So newsletters, we have an intranet, so it's an internal website where you can view articles and recordings. And I see Business Engage is also recording the session, which is great, which means we can share it, and then your reach is a lot wider, right? And the final two, I'd say funding, especially in year one. If you're looking to support this, a big enabler is allowing the people on the ground to make use of resources. So as an example, even for this discussion we're having now, the best way to make sure attendance is high is to provide some croissants, early morning croissants and coffee. So it enables the team to maximize impact. And then an important learning is also just having clearly segmented work streams. So once you have your team, allowing people within their work streams, within the affinity network, to deliver impact. So as an example, with Enable, we identified 4. We have education and awareness, employee engagement, commercial and collaboration, and enabling Kearney. And then, yeah, so that's essentially what we did right. First taking a step back. But I'd say I've spent a lot of time reflecting on, if we were to start today, what are the 3 key things you need to get right? And I'm not saying we didn't do it, but maybe there was space to kind of land it a little bit more. So firstly, benchmarking to know where you are before jumping head first into initiatives. So I think, given the broader context of Project Vital and advancing DEI at Kearney, we kind of had to accelerate the launch. But actually just taking, let's say, a couple of months, bringing in a partner to take a look at your organization, tell you, okay, this is what's out there, this is where you are, and this is how you can reach what's best in class, can make sure that you target your efforts a lot better. Secondly, I'd say mobilizing the network first before initiatives. So what is an affinity network? As mentioned, it's a platform of people coming together with like-minded thoughts, right? So that's something that, given the legislative implications of people self-identifying with disabilities, something that we struggled with at the beginning. And if we were to start today, it's making sure that you've got a core group of people who you know you're actually advocating for within the organization. We launched first and then we mobilized the network afterwards. If we were to do it today, I'd say reversing that order can even be better, because you can identify initiatives bottom up that way. And then finally, so real impact happens at an office level, as mentioned. So the micro enables the macro change, right? It's the discussions at the water cooler. It's the knowing that your colleague has a disability, so, or let's say a hearing impairment, so putting your camera on to make sure they can lip read, or knowing your colleague is colorblind, so making sure the color palette that you use accommodates them. So making sure that real impact happens at a micro level, you have to have people on board from day one. So identifying key individuals in the office and having the, as Abby likes to call it, change champions within office across the organization.
I love that. And I think, Francois, your point, your last point refers to the emergence theory, right? That's where complex systems, complex patterns, etc., are all off the back of interactions at a simpler level. And if we start those basics, the upward trajectory is quite key. What I did like, and I think it's important just to echo, is the partnership proposition. Is that going it alone? And I think often we want to be the first to have done, or we want to have landed something. And by nature, we are resilient, we dig deep, and we find a way to get things done. But partnerships are actually key, and for a number of reasons. The collective impact around working, you mentioned disability and springboard, transcend, etc. The diverse perspective, plus the experience and expertise gained in something that they're expert in terms of day-to-day. Shared resources, which we've leveraged, I think, quite a bit on training in terms of educating awareness, and the increased influence and reach. And to your point, it's around the ability to scale with someone that actually has presence on the ground. And it gives us increased resilience and sustainability. So maybe just one of the pieces adding to the lessons learned is that those partnerships are quite crucial when we roll out. But your passion is tangible. I think I've seen it firsthand and experienced it in the spaces. And this affinity network aims to go toe to toe with a lot of the pieces we're doing, but really the intersectionality. And I think the fireside chat that you mentioned with the first woman chartered accountant in South Africa that's completely deaf, that learned to speak, that lives in Australia, allowed us to connect the APAC region with the women's network, with Black at Kearney, Indian lady, with what we're wanting to do at Enable. And that resonates on so many levels in terms of actually I can connect with you, and for various reasons at the back of my affinity. I think to you and to the team and to everyone that is behind this, well done on the connection. And maybe if we step back from that, so we've had some really granular tools, Nolan, that you've shared that have been put in place at the back of big ticket items like the People Jam, the Enable network being launched, and the even better ifs we could consider going forward. Maybe, Abby, from your side, how do you envisage then the actual future of DE&I at Kearney? We've seen a little bit like maybe an odd analogy to use, but it's like the London Underground. The trains in the countryside are far apart, and as you get closer to the city centre, the stops are shorter and shorter. And that's almost how we learn, right? It exponentially speeds up in the spaces. Your thoughts on the future?
Thanks, Joe. Love what everyone's been saying so far. So I think a couple important things that we're doing and how we're approaching it and how we want to, continue to move forward. So I think the first is, and some of it's been mentioned already, is the collective ownership piece, that every single individual can contribute to the conversation, to the people experience, to the environment that they support and create for each other. So, a leader giving that top-down sponsorship, the person on the ground who's a network member providing allyship and support to their team member, someone, a manager supporting an environment where apprenticeship and learning can happen on the ground. Every single person, no matter where you are, your rank, your identity, it's important that everybody comes to the table and helps on this D&I journey. And I think that collective ownership principle is really important. The other thing that's really important is how do you, yes, you've got Project Vital, you've got special D&I initiatives, but ultimately, how do you embed this into your business as usual? And that's really what we're pushing for, that we translate global strategy and big global projects like Project Vital and integrated it into every single country's business as usual. So the way that we're doing it as D&I is not a typical vertical under an HR umbrella, but a horizontal that runs across every single functional area, every team, every project. So, the way that we work with staffing, with the people experience team, with our operations team, data analytics, the PMO, every single person is a touch point on this journey, and it recognizes how we are all change agents. So that business as usual principle allows us to be more sustainable. And yes, you may go slower because you've got to get everyone on board, but it allows you to go faster in the end. The other thing that's really important is what we're doing with our D&I strategy, and the way that we're approaching this is really thinking about the change management journey that this organization and every single individual is on. Because if you look at that intersection between your capabilities, your culture, the way that you drive change management, everything needs to come together. So putting training at the onset of this isn't necessarily going to be effective because people aren't necessarily ready for that training. How do you build awareness? How do you build desire? Really building that case for change and explaining why we're doing it, what we're working towards, how you're going to get there, then putting in place the necessary trainings, the enablers, the building blocks, making sure then there's the right environment, the culture for application of training before you then shift into sustainable ways of working. So we're really conscious of what that change management journey needs to look like. And then I think ultimately what we really are pushing on is, yes, diversity is our first step, right? Get your representation in the door. But what happens once they're in the door? Because if you don't answer that question, you lose the diversity anyway. So making sure that you balance the work that you're doing on the recruitment side with the retention pieces around staying and thriving and supporting people to feel genuine, authentic inclusion and belonging on the ground, because that's really what's going to allow for inclusion to happen. And equity then facilitates those pieces. So acknowledging, like Enable is doing, when you enter a room on a project, you have different abilities, you have different lived experiences, different backgrounds, all those things. You're not starting from the same place. So how do you support each other via the leadership
Abby.
top down? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Can
No,
you
you're
hear me?
back.
Oh, okay. I don't know where you lost
Yes, all
me.
good.
But if I think you might have lost me at that equity piece. Is that where you lost
Yes, we
me?
did.
Okay. So, when you step into the room, how do you make sure that you've got the necessary environment for everybody to thrive? So no matter what they enter the room with, you're equipping them, you're empowering them, you're enabling and supporting them to all function, regardless of their lived experiences, their backgrounds, their previous capabilities that they came in. So that real holistic approach of how D&I is the puzzle piece and all the things Nolan was speaking about, they all come together. All of those mechanisms, programs, initiatives, and business as usual all need to function in a way that's sustainable for this to stick.
And I love that. And I think your point around not starting with the solution in mind, but with cultivating awareness as a starting point, then the business case, and then it actually iterates after that. And then you measure progress, then you address intersectionality.
Exactly.
But actually taking people on the journey with you is what makes the journey sustainable. Francois spoke to the depth and the affinity networks that they last long after they were initially initiated, and what that means in terms of the structure. So I think, to your point, the future of D&I is not about perfection, but rather about progress and understanding the journey, the individuals, the organization, embracing the continuous nature that this takes work, and being open to learning and to growth. I think the reality, and you alluded to it in the very beginning and again now, is that we learn more as we go, and as a consequence of learning more, we have to adapt, course correct, continually enhance and evolve. So I think the future actually is lined with hope and optimism, because being here is a deliberate intent, and a deliberate action and intention plays its way into outcomes when we have people holding each other to account, but we are conscious, and that consciousness is key. So Abby, I think, thank you. Nolan, if we feed off that piece around embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, and breaking down the barriers, challenging the status quo, the culture, the respect, and building a much more connected workplace, given you spend most of your waking hours with your work colleagues or at work in the work environment, requires a commitment. So maybe one thing from yourself around those of us that choose to champion and want to diversity, equity, and inclusion, what should organizations prioritize in their approach to D&I? What would you suggest?
So for me, Joe, it's really about being conscious and deliberate about the change that you want to make. I think you can completely miss the mark if you're not conscious and deliberate about what you want to do within your organization. So being conscious around DE&I in terms of everything that you do within your organization, and this ranges from your recruitment to learning and development to health and well-being to reward and recognition. Every aspect of what you do in an organization has to be built on the building blocks of DE&I. I think that's really critical in getting it right. Something else that's also important is understanding what the needs of your people are, because again, you can miss the mark if you are not fully aware of what is it that you need to focus on. So engagement, regular engagement with your people, having open conversations, creating a safe space for people to come forward and speak up about what is it that is needed and what you need to focus on. I think for me, these are the core elements of getting the DE&I agenda right in your company.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's been very much around considered thinking. You can't be everyone to everything to everyone, but in a structured way. And maybe Abby, just to highlight what you said earlier, go slow to go fast later and farther later, which ties into your pieces, Francois. Maybe one question to you, Francois, before I go back to the audience for any Q&A, and we'll take it from there, is if I think about disability, actually all of our affinity networks, and how this forms part of our firm building, how we create our culture through our people. How do you balance it all? I think it's really important that we've said it's not a side story to our day jobs, but rather who we are, given your role, and you mentioned your day job plus this. How do you do it all?
Joe, I think the moment you asked that question, something popped up, and it's passion. Whatever you're taking on apart from your day job, make sure you're passionate about it so that it feels effortless. I think in addition to passion, we're only as good as the people that support us. And I'm lucky to have an amazing team around me across the Middle East and Africa region, within Johannesburg, as well as the broader organization. So people like Nolan, like Abby, like yourself, just allowing individuals to kind of drive impact to things that are aligned to what they're passionate about.
Fantastic. So you've got the purpose piece there, the passion piece, and the people in each of those elements. I think it plays out in the pillars that we talked about earlier, which is client, people, and community. And what's really important in those is we've often had sessions that says find your why. And the interesting component around all of what we discussed this morning is find your who. So who you do the why for, I think, is equally important. So maybe time for some questions to the team. Nolan, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you. Gerda asked a question a little bit earlier on around the health and well-being, and we talked about holistically coming to work and what it means in terms of supporting our teams. Do we have a health and well-being policy that encompasses it all from a well-being perspective? And it all is quite a big ask, but maybe over to you around where we are in the journey.
So to put it simply, we don't have a well-being policy, but what we have done is embedded elements of well-being into everything that we do. So a lot of our ways of working, and I spoke about, we have a ways of working charter for teams that really encompasses, or part of it encompasses well-being and ways of working. It's part of our discussions that we have. We have mentor-mentee relationships, and there's also where we have touch points around overall well-being. How are people doing? And this really gives everyone the opportunity to speak up at the time that is appropriate. And I think that's really important for us. Apart from that, Abby touched on one of our committees being the People Care and Development Team. The People Care and Development Team is really a team that drives people care and development within the office. And part of that, a big part of that is around our mental health and well-being, physical health and well-being, where we have a lot of initiatives that are run through the year to really push on the well-being agenda and to also create a space openness and safeness for people to speak up and say if they are not well, or if they are well, and how can they help someone else. So we've really embedded it more into our processes, into our ways of working, into the interactions we have between managers and their teams, or mentors and their mentees.
We've got a hand. Thank you, Nolan. I think that encompasses all around how to integrate it into how we do what we do, as opposed to legislated, so to speak, through policy. Thank you. Ashley, I think you've got your hand up.
Thank you so much, Joanne, and thank you, team, for the great presentation. I have really enjoyed it. I just want to share something with the team, and then I have a follow-up question. So I have a friend in office who recently hurt herself, and when she did mention to HR, they wanted her, because it's a very private conversation, they wanted her to, either identify or speak up and let us know. On the HR side, I'm not sure how that happened, but I only got a portion of it from her, and she refused to identify. She doesn't feel like she is, to a certain extent, disabled or anything like that. From my end, how can I support or encourage her? Because it's the first time it is this close to me, and it's someone that I know, because we work very closely together. So just from my end, I just want to know my support in terms of, because I don't think that the visibility is there for people who do not have disabilities when it comes to the HR. I think it's a very private conversation they have. So just from the outside, from my end, to support my friend, how can I go about just to encourage her?
Happy to take that, Nolan. Otherwise, also happy to start, and Francois, because it links specifically to enable.
Yeah.
So maybe just Nolan, over to you, and then I'll add some pieces.
Yeah, sure. I think sometimes, it's opening up the conversation is the first step, and allowing someone to feel safe and allowing them to share is really important in your situation as well. And I think you've done that already, but sometimes it takes some additional support in order to get some movement, or to encourage maybe a bit more support that's needed. And it's really up to the individual to share the kind of and the level of support that they need. I think that is going to be important. Sometimes it's easier for an individual to share it with a third party rather than someone that they know very well. And I think at some point you may want to consider having a third party that's involved, someone that's completely objective, out of the situation, that may make it easier for the individual to share and maybe talk about what is it that they need.
Thank you. Francois,
yeah, maybe Francois had his hand up.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question, Ashley. I think that's a great question, and also a challenging situation you find yourself in. So I think my response there is, so we kind of take it back to the platform discussion, right? That you've created the platform for the individual to kind of come forward and open up towards the office. Apart from that, as Nolan mentioned, maybe taking a third party is the next step. But on a personal level, I fully believe that people first. So maybe just checking in on her now and again, asking genuinely, how are you doing? Because of course she's kind of found comfort within you. So knowing that you're not going to be everything everywhere all at once, you're not necessarily going to change someone else, but just having the empathy to be like, in a Teams call, as a practical example, one-on-one, if you know she trusts you, how are you doing? How can I support you?
And I think maybe to build on that is your point around supporting and being compassionate and empathetic, listening. Sometimes we're not sure of the value that self-identification could possibly have. So talking through that, not because you necessarily have the answers, but with a third party, how do you lean in? And we've had a number of individuals through the Affinity Network put their hand up to say they want to be an ally. Others want to be a member. The allies would like to advocate for awareness, etc., but the members themselves have not necessarily self-ID'd with their managers, etc., but wanting to find a forum where they gain enough courage over time to do that. So I think it's about leaning in, listening, and asking them sometimes what they would like you to do, because often it's easier for a third party or a third person to engage and ask questions for a friend in the spaces. I think it speaks volumes about you, though, that someone reached in and lent into you. Congratulations. Abby's also got a response in the chat. Just going there quickly in terms of some of the next step. She said, wellbeing ambassadors, I think is agreed. That's fantastic opportunity and something maybe we could think about. We've got PCND team that look after wellbeing in pillars, but actual wellbeing ambassadors would be awesome. There are options around individuals reaching in and leaning in terms of offline support. And then the conversation's a bit more around the importance around various charters that can be customized around a team or an organization context that give you the space to discuss things in terms of how you work, ways of working, and levels of confidentiality. It is, I think, self-identification across the world is not an easy piece. And just to give you examples, range between 1% and 6%. If you think 15% of individuals are in a space where they are either disabled or living with a disability or person with a disability. And one of the key things that actually has worked in some other organizations, because we've got a global network of co-sponsors on Enable, has been looking at leaderships telling their stories. We've got a This Is Me campaign around mental well-being where people share their stories, and those are for internal consumptions and very beautifully crafted that you almost find yourself resonating with someone, then understanding their journey once they're opened up. So there are various layers. Happy to connect with you more separately and soundboard maybe what those options could be. Thank you. I've got another question then off the back of that, and thank you for the question, Ashley. And Abby, this one's to you, is how can our DEI efforts extend beyond just these internal initiatives? So creating positive impact is there, but there's a broader community that we live in, or a broader industry that we operate in, and could we impact that?
Yes, of course. And I think it goes back to how we formalized our D&I strategy with Project Vital, and specifically in the Middle East and Africa region, where we've translated global strategy into our 3 pillars around people, clients, and communities, and really with a vision to be leading in this space. And so while we have all these initiatives and the work going on the people so-called pillar, we also already do work with our clients. So we've got a value proposition specifically via the leadership change and organization practice that speaks to D&I, and it looks at the journey that you need to take to baseline your organization to understand what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, how you can design programs around that, and what the implementation roadmap would look like. So already work getting down the client side, but more importantly on the social impact and community pillar, there's a lot of work that can be done, and you can think of it through various lenses. So I think the first is, if you're already doing social impact work in the form of, say, donations or time spent to volunteer, how do you align the organizations that you select with a D&I lens and set of considerations? So for example, if you target, so-called random donation approaches, how do you formalize the intentionality behind what your donation is to achieve? So that's one way to do it. The other way is through the partnerships lens. So how do you work with organizations that are already pursuing D&I work, be it actual D&I, but also again with organizations that help to empower, enable, and support those of non-dominant or marginalized communities. So how do you partner with them and pool your resources to collaborate? And we do a lot of this. So our Kula team is our social impact team in South Africa, but we've got a broader sustainability and social impact team that runs both, in the region of Middle East and Africa, but also across, the global governance structures. And we work a lot with, be it the UN, with the World Economic Forum, with all these various partners who are all pursuing similar intentions and ambitions when it comes to social impact work. And again, it's also around how do you support through thought leadership. So if you've got a set of expertise, capabilities, resources, how do you support others through giving of that? So again, we also do work around, the thought leadership piece, especially when I think of NGOs and government work around policy. So how do you support women empowerment, women enablement policy change and structural work there? So there's a lot that can be done that goes way beyond, just the internal pillar lens. And what's so critical is the learnings that we've had as an organization on our own D&I journey. We're able to share that with our clients and our community organizations.
And I think to your point, what we don't often do is share with each other in these broader forums. So the connected workplace is just that platform, is to reach out to us Ideally, our win-win scenario is not to have to earn the scars we've earned or learn the lessons we've learned, but rather to grow and go forward from them differently. We continue to learn from counterparts that we engage with, and as a consequence, the impact is greater and bigger, and comes through a lot earlier if we do that. I think what's quite important around some of the initiatives raised is what we have found is sometimes everyone's not aware of those initiatives. And so being really deliberate about showcasing not only what we do as an organization professionally and for our clients, but what we do for our people on a regular basis, because those champions are the people that have been impacted by it, get to share and tell their stories. And the COVID years also found people a lot more isolated. So to reiterate those components around what is available around tools, mechanisms, process, forums, etc., so that people are more and more aware and get to use them a lot more regularly, I think is key. Maybe, Francois, you can touch on one example linked to community for Enable that's coming up. We haven't done it yet, but I think maybe the San Salvador is a great example, because actually these initiatives create and generate oxytocin. They are feel good. And what we've seen is that they actually pay it forward in terms of how they play out in our organization. But maybe to share a bit more on that quickly, if you don't mind, Francois.
No, definitely, Joe. Thank you so much. So I think just to give you context behind the San Salvador initiative, which we're running ahead of Casual Day on 27th of August, is the intersectionality aspect. So that's a big theme for us this year, trying to collaborate with our other affinity networks. And this is actually an event where we pulled in Kula, so our social impact affinity network, as well as the Women's Network. So San Salvador is right on our doorstep. It's across from Gibbs, and it's a home for women living with visible and invisible disabilities. And we're planning a charity day with them, as well as a charitable donation. So it's going to be extremely exciting, extremely impactful, and in the end, what I like to come back to is it's about creating a difference for our people, our clients, as well as the communities which we find ourselves in. I think the impact is behind the fact that they share the same postcode as us and they're right on our doorstep. I also think if anyone has a Saturday or some free time, please go visit that institution. It's absolutely incredible what they're doing. The people with disabilities, they weave and they create products which they sell, and they use that to in turn fund the home themselves. I think they have about 60 residents. Super exciting, and I think a final takeaway from my side is, apart from all the global what's next for Kearney, so we're talking at a global disability awareness conference, the biggest one across the globe. Joe's actually being a moderator there as well for 4,500 attendees. We're launching various initiatives across the globe, across the region, etc. But I think this one is the most special because it's right on our back door, and for me, it means the most.
Thank you, Francois. And I think with that, there's one more question in the chat that I'm going to go to. Khadi, you actually asked a little bit earlier around how we embed elements into the things that we do, and specifically, are we willing to share the ways of working charter? I know Nolan's put his email address. Please reach out and lean into us. Very happy to share what we use and what works. I think what's interesting in some of our project teams is we've got our most junior consultants often to actually run with some of those spaces. It gave them a voice, which was quite important, or anyone in the team that we had identified from a confidence perspective needed a framework or construct to share their ways of working or structure, and that's been really instrumental in those spaces. So very happy to share. Please lean in to us. Our email addresses are in the chat. And the other thing that's come up off the earlier question on self-identification, and that came up around a number of our affinity networks where you tick a box what it means. Different jurisdictions have different risks around how you identify with various affinity networks, so quite deliberate. But one of the pieces we've also worked on and is important is respecting individuals' choices. So sometimes our friends, our colleagues, their level of autonomy, allowing them to get there at their own space or in their own pace, and when they write in their own space has been quite key. So that environment has been just as instrumental in helping them make a choice versus any personal pressure, which is something we've been quite deliberate about, creating that respect for choices, and choice being the golden thread throughout our diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. People are deliberate, but they choose to be a part of the process. And as a consequence, it's far more impactful and meaningful and sustainable in the spaces. Conscious of time, I did see a hand almost go up. Are there any final questions? Yeah. Otherwise, as we wrap up and close out, the rewards, I think, of embracing what is essentially right, living out our values, and that's in how we experience people and how people experience us, is immeasurable. It's what allows us to not only build bridges, but also be the bridge. It helps break down walls. It helps foster understanding. So listening with an empathetic ear, being curious, but authentically and sincerely, etc. It breaks down divisions. It cultivates a world that is more inclusive, more connected. As you can see, we're all interconnected in that space. So what we did do as a reminder of this is we started a campaign of what would you tell your younger self? And one of the reasons for that was wanting to understand how our wisdom could leave a mark, not just on our own immediate family members or on people closest to us or friends, but in the organization that we're in and the people we work with. Because often the advice, we always said, what would you do differently? What's an ever better if, or what's a must have? And as a consequence, I'd like to play you out. And on behalf of Kearney, thank you very, very much for your detail today, for your feedback. We'd like to play you out with this video around Wisdom Leaves a Mark, celebrating both Youth Day, but also the experience around the table, including all of yourselves and what you bring to your organizations, your clients, your communities, and your people. So think about what it is you would tell others and how you share those stories in shaping the narrative around diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is not a statement, but rather it is embodied in who we are, why we do what we do, and who we do it for. And with that, thank you very much for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your week. A very happy and warm Monday to everyone that is based in South Africa, and to those that are listening from further afield. We wish you a wonderful week too. Here's to being the difference you want to see in the world. Thank you. Oh, there's no sound, unfortunately. Theo, if you don't mind, we'll replay again. Theo, can you share it with sound? Actually, what I will do is I'll actually leave the link in. Please watch it. I think it's a great reminder of ourselves, to ourselves, of some lessons learned. But I'll share the link in the chat for everyone as well. Thank you all. Abby, Francois, Nolan, thank you for your wisdom, your time, and your insight shared. Happy Monday. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great
Thanks,
week.
everyone.
Cheers. Thanks all.
Thank you.